The controversial nomination of our state's chief election officer moves forward despite opposition at the Capitol.
His most important job is to protect the citizens' right to vote.
We're looking closer at the case for and against David Whitley and how his nomination fight could affect the session.
I'm 8 years old and I support this bill.
A young entrepreneur makes a big impression on lawmakers at the Capitol. How he stepped up to testify about a bill that affects his business.
Hello, and thank you for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. The man at the center of the controversy over a list that's incorrectly flagged thousands of registered voters as non-citizens is one step closer to being confirmed as the Texas Secretary of State. On Thursday, the Senate Nominations Committee agreed to advance the nomination of David Whitley to the full Senate. The vote was 4-3 along party lines. Democrats on the committee spoke out in opposition.
We're senators with a duty to assure our state does not deny people equal protection of the laws. Senators with a duty to protect the right to vote. Senators with a duty under our Constitution to advise and consent in the appointment of powerful people capable of creating fear and anxiety and to intimidate the least powerful among us.
Whitley needs a 2/3 majority vote in the Senate to keep his job. Right now, he does not appear to have the votes. Whitley's nomination advanced one day after a federal judge ordered county election officials in Texas to temporarily stop removing people from voter rolls. The judge said there is no evidence of voter fraud. The order stops election officials from sending letters to voters asking them for a proof of citizenship. Counties are also being directed not to remove voters from voter rolls without court approval. We want to take a deeper dive into the Whitley nomination. Joining us for perspective, Emma Platoff, a reporter for the Texas Tribune, and Ben Philpott, senior editor for KUT Public Radio in Austin. Welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for having us.
So we heard Senator Watson speak out just now against Whitley's nomination. He also raised concerns that Senate leaders could try to call the vote when one or more Democrats were absent to push him through. Is that the only way that this is going to move forward, Emma?
So far, we've seen all 12 Texas Senate Democrats say they're against the confirmation. If they all stick together and if they're on the floor at the same time, which is an important point that Senator Watson raised, then the confirmation can't move forward. That said, we weren't expecting to see him move out of committee, and he did this week. That's the most progress he's made in a while.
So big picture, what's the impact if he does get approved?
Well, I mean, if he does get approved, it is just another... it's just an example of the Republicans do totally control state government, and you know, despite the concerns, despite the lawsuits, Governor Abbott, you know, believes in his former chief of staff and wants him to have this job. You know, it will be interesting. It's going to take 3 Democrats to walk off the floor for or to not be there for the Republicans alone to get him through. If one flips, we were doing math earlier. If one flips. One Democrat flips and joins the Republicans, then only one Democrat would have to be absent for this to go through. But this seems like a fight that Democrats are willing to dig in on.
And we're getting the same from the governor, who said on the radio earlier this week he wouldn't be surprised if some Democrats change their position. You know, he's been sending people off to have meetings. Secretary Whitley has been holding meetings, and it seems like no one's ready to give up on this fight yet.
I just think nationally, voting has become such a big deal, from what's happened in North Carolina with the election fraud there to the Speaker of the U.S. Senate coming on the floor this week or the last week and saying that, you know, everyone needs to watch out for voter fraud and Democrats need to be careful about how they're voting on these things. I mean, it just seems like, I just don't know that this is an issue where you're going to be able to flip Democrats, considering the national just the national implications of it, and with a president who constantly is talking about illegal voters all over the country.
And of course, in Texas, the history is multiple findings, you know, finding after finding from federal courts of intentional discrimination from Texas Republicans, and it seems like we may be on our way to that finding again. A federal judge just this week said we need to put a halt on this, basically, while 3 separate federal lawsuits from civil rights groups proceed, trying to stop Texas from purging these voters before we can really get a handle on what's going on with the flawed data set.
It was not a polite ruling either, saying it was the effort from the Secretary of State's office was ham-handed, and that, yeah, that any county that wants to do anything about this list has to contact the judge first.
What's the impact if he is not approved?
Well, if there's no vote on Secretary Whitley's confirmation before the end of the session, he can't serve after the session ends. If he's rejected, he's out of the job immediately. But ultimately, however it happens, if he ends up getting ousted from the position, Governor Abbott will appoint someone else. And I don't think there's any reason to believe that he would appoint someone who's ideologically super different from Secretary Whitley.
And if it happens where we just don't get a vote for the rest of the session, then the governor could appoint someone, and it would be a year and a half before that nomination would even come up. So they would just be in that office.
Now, obviously, one of the leaders who has kind of come into this controversy when we talk about the possibility of voter fraud is Ken Paxton, our Attorney General, because he put that release out saying that this was voter fraud. How's that going for him? I mean, are we seeing a lot of pushback with his office?
His office was actually named in one of the federal lawsuits, and the judge this week said, I'm not going to take any action to sort of censure Ken Paxton. The biggest complaint civil rights group had about him was this kind of immediate tweet, voter fraud alert, in all caps, which they say, you know, there's no evidence yet that there was any voter fraud at all. The judge said, you know, I'm not going to take action on that. Ken Paxton has a First Amendment right to worry about voter fraud if he chooses to.
Are people calling him out on this?
I mean, I think Democrats surely are, and they are actually calling him out in terms of not just him, but the governor, the president. Again, this what they see is a coordinated effort to try and spin this into massive voter fraud, as opposed to what it appears to be, which is a handful of people that were on the rolls. And that's, I think, what frustrates Democrats the most, is that they don't want there to be this false narrative of having 100,000 people that, you know, undocumented people on the voter rolls.
The other question, of course, relating to the Attorney General's office is whether these people are going to be prosecuted, and his office has given kind of contradictory answers to that, so we don't know exactly what's going on.
A lot to see how it's going to play out. And Emma, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
I don't see how a 21-year-old healthy kid who ain't never had no heart problems can just fall dead, regardless on what crime they ever committed. The point is, there's still people out here that love and believe in them. Just the basic information should be enough, just so we can go to bed at night and not cry our eyes out wondering what happened when you don't get real answers.
Our investigation becomes part of a battle at the state capitol as families tell lawmakers how police have denied them answers about their loved ones' deaths in custody. Like this mother, whose son we uncovered went to get medical attention after weeks of complaining to Travis County jailers about severe pain. He was turned away, then died in his cell just hours later. Our reporting has revealed police across Texas taking advantage of what's now known as the dead suspect loophole. It allows agencies to keep information secret in certain closed criminal cases where someone dies after they're arrested. We've been following the fight to change this law for 2 years. Now it's one step closer to reality.
My wife and I got the most dreaded phone call any parent can ever receive. Our son had been arrested by the Mesquite Police Department.
It's been nearly 6 years since Robert and Kathy Dyer learned their 18-year-old son had been arrested for public intoxication and was in the hospital.
Get your hands out of your pockets. Get your hands. Get back. Get back. Get back. Get back.
Told us that Graham was very gravely injured.
He died hours later, but police denied the Dyers any details about how or why. Only years later, through the FBI, they obtained the video showing their son tased repeatedly by officers,
I've got a seat.
then slamming his head roughly 50 times in the back of a patrol car, leading to his death.
You can't tell a parent, well, your child died, so we don't have to tell you what happened. That doesn't make any sense at all.
As hard as this is, I just thank you, because you're going to save lives. And you're going to prevent other parents from having to go through what you've gone through.
The Dyers testified in favor of a bill that would require police to release information when a suspect dies in custody.
All this is about is closing a loophole and shining a light on incidents where our government is involved in the loss of a life.
I'm not surprised that there'd be strong opposition from law enforcement.
Police unions from across the state showed up with concerns about internal affairs investigations and evidence surrounding police officer deaths.
Because there's two perspectives on this issue, I think is a better way to make sure we can do this.
I hear and respect the concerns some of our witnesses have testified about, which is why I've already committed to fixing the internal affairs concern. Also heard the concerns about the privacy of those in law enforcement that have lost a colleague.
The blood slowly dripping out from his head and his body encased in blood. I don't want that to be available for the media or anybody else.
That is something that I think we can certainly address as well.
As the law stays as it is, the police will continue to deny families those records.
This marks the second legislative session Robert and Kathy Dyer have testified for this legislation. Last session, it passed committee approval but failed to progress because it was near the end of the session. Because it's come before the committee 2 months earlier this session, supporters believe it has a much greater chance of making it to the governor's desk. The committee should vote on the bill in the next few weeks. We'll keep you updated as it moves forward. Now, the law enforcement agencies involved in the cases in our report have said they're simply exercising what the law allows, and they maintain no wrongdoing. Right now online, see our analysis of the widespread use of this police loophole. It's part of our ongoing denied investigation. Just search for this story in the Texas Politics section of your station's website.
The Texas House takes on the debate over how to give you relief from rising property taxes.
I'm concerned that if it continues, I may not be able to stay in my house that I'm in.
But one senator could have an outsized role in how the property tax plan moves forward. We go one-on-one with a maverick in the Senate and how he could influence key bills this session.
Hello. We are here to drop something off for Senator Colhurst. Is she in?
I just wanted to drop off a little packet, but I wanted to make sure that it got to Representative Clary.
And there's women in his district who've shared their stories, so we wanted to make sure you had the information.
Our Mothers Erased investigation sparking change at the state capitol as our team visits dozens of lawmakers to talk about our findings and the need to address a major health crisis, mothers dying from pregnancy complications. We first told you about the issue as moms from across the state who barely survived childbirth sent us video diaries detailing their experiences. During our trip to the Capitol, we shared those stories with lawmakers, and we've learned one of them has filed a bill to ensure those stories are not forgotten. Representative Sean Theory spoke with us about how she nearly died when giving birth to her daughter. Her new bill would create a statewide registry to make sure mothers who lived and mothers who died but aren't currently part of the state's official maternal mortality rate are considered in research to address this problem, which could include better training and awareness for medical professionals and families. House lawmakers got an earful last week as they heard from people on both sides of a bill to tighten caps on local property tax increases.
Property taxes have just gone up so much in Houston that I'm concerned that if it continues, I may not be able to stay in my house that I'm in.
Homeowners from around Texas came to the Capitol to testify in support of House Bill 2. That bill would put a 2.5% cap on annual property tax increases. The current cap is 8%. But city leaders from around the state worry that that cap would limit the ability of cities and counties to provide public safety services.
Working together and understanding what the people want from tax reform, but at the same time finding, again, we are looking for that balance to make sure that we can provide for the public safety.
The Senate's version of the property tax reform bill passed out of committee earlier this month and will head to the full Senate when the lieutenant governor calls for a vote. One senator in particular could have a big impact on how that bill moves forward. Politics reporter Phil Prazen spoke one-on-one with Amarillo Republican Kel Seliger. He's a bit of a maverick in the Senate.
Well, yeah, Josh, Senator Seliger from Amarillo is the only Republican senator to publicly come out against this property tax cap. Now, that's important because the author of the bill says he's short by 1 vote to pass it through the Senate. This isn't the first time Senator Seliger has bucked the Republican leadership, and he talked to me about that earlier this week.
One of the defining issues so far this legislative session has been the quest by Governor Greg Abbott, Speaker of the House Dennis Bonnen, and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick to limit the growth of local property taxes. A Senate bill requiring an election for a local government growing more than 2.5% a year quickly passed the Senate committee despite overwhelming opposition from local elected leaders, fearing it would cut into public safety. But that effort is frozen. Amarillo Senator Kel Seliger is the only Republican senator publicly opposed.
To assume that property taxes are only important to certain members here because you adhere to a certain piece of legislation, nothing could be more false. There's a lot of different ways to get there. I happen to get there by listening to locally elected officials, and regardless of what people in this building think, some of the most capable and dedicated people in the state of Texas, certainly among elected officials, are the ones that we elect to City Hall and the county courthouse.
Seliger was the mayor of Amarillo before elected to the state Senate in 2004. His priorities haven't changed much, making sure West Texas gets its fair share of resources for roads, public schools, higher education, and mental health. Over the years, statewide politics have changed. State leaders more and more look to overrule cities and counties. Seliger often sides with the locals for things like property taxes, resources for public schools, ride-sharing regulations for companies like Uber and Lyft, and red light cameras.
And one of the things that we don't want to do in the Texas legislature, I think, is absolve people of the responsibility of going to vote for the people who represent you locally. It is the most responsive form of government to a very great extent. Locally, we have the government we deserve based by the people we vote for or the people we don't vote for.
You have to have 19 votes. When that's a partisan matter, you need all the Republicans, and there's only 19 of them. So that puts any given Republican in a position of saying, I'm for this or I'm against this. And given his situation, both ideologically and his, the tension between him and the lieutenant governor, that generally puts Seliger in the decision-making position about whether something's going to go or not.
That tension flared at the beginning of the session. Patrick did not reappoint Seliger to chair the powerful Higher Education Committee, putting him atop the Agriculture Committee instead.
I made those decisions based on a number of factors.
When Seliger spoke against that decision, Patrick's advisor, Sherry Sylvester, said they could appoint another person to Agriculture as well. And then Seliger said this on the radio.
And really unbecoming for a member of the staff, the lieutenant governors or my staff. I didn't say anything of the sort, and that assertion is disingenuous. And I have a recommendation from Ms. Sylvester and her lips in my back end.
Calling that comment lewd, Patrick stripped him of that position as well. And now he's the only Republican without a leadership role.
What is to them just a bad relationship at the moment or a bad patch of road at the moment is in the way of state policy or of the things that you sent them both here to do.
Was that more on policy, or was that more of a personality thing?
Everything begins, I think, really on policy and largely policy. Just, once again, fundamental disagreements, and I'm always going to come down on the side of the people I represent, the people who sent me here.
Those people continue to send Seliger to Austin. In 2018, he defeated not one, but two opponents in the Republican primary. While political trends change across the state, Seliger remains.
Really, I'm sort of a Reagan small government person, called a localist. There's nothing new about me when it comes to a basic conservative philosophy, nothing.
As for property taxes, Senator Seliger has his own idea. Instead of capping the revenue local governments can collect, his bill caps the growth of your appraisal at 5% from last year. That, he says, will go further in relieving your burden while not putting new burdens on cities, counties, and school districts. Josh?
We've talked about Seliger being the maverick of the Senate. How's that going to play out for him with this?
Well, right now, his property tax bill doesn't have any co-authors. It's just filed. It hasn't been referred to committee. So it is going to be difficult. I mean, when you decide to buck so publicly the Republican leadership in the Senate, there's a cost to be paid.
All right. Phil, thank you. Up next, a reminder that age should not hold you back from speaking out about legislation that affects your life.
I'm 8 years old and I support this bill.
How a boy with business ambitions made a big impression on lawmakers at the Capitol. There's just something American about kids running a lemonade stand, but some kids in Texas can't set up shop because of local ordinances and city permit rules. Now a bill at the Texas Capitol is looking to change that. Photojournalist Andrew Choate introduces us to an 8-year-old entrepreneur who's working to get lawmakers on board.
This is 280.
Hi, I'm Brenton Burton and I'm representing myself.
Excellent. See, adults, this is how you do it. I don't have to tell him twice.
I'm 8 years old and I support this bill. This bill will support me and thousands of other kids to have the chance to start their own lemonade business without having to go figure out and pay for city permits or being worried about getting in trouble with the health department. Last Last year on Lemonade Day, which was on my mom's birthday, was my first time creating a business. I negotiated a prime location with a neighbor down the street who has a very visible corner with lots of traffic. I offered Sonic Ice or fresh squeezed juice for an upcharge. Overall, I pulled in over $300 in revenue, and after repaying my loan, I made $246 in profit. I saved some, donated some, and spent some on toys. And it gave me confidence to be able to speak to people I haven't met, like all of you.
Any questions for this fantastic?
Yes, sir. Would you be interested in coming to work for me?
Branson's testimony happened in front of the House State Affairs Committee. The bill in question is House Bill 234. The lemonade stand bill is still pending in that committee. Thank you again for joining us for State of Texas. I'm Josh Hinkle. We'll be back next week to bring you an in-depth look at Texas politics.